Peaceful place, it's a lovely place. I needed time to think, to sort things out. It's a place where I always go, and I just like it. It's my place. I was feeling really good. I was walking along the cliff top path, and it was a cold night. I could hear the waves beating on the rocks below. And I got this excruciating pain come to my chest. Having had 2 heart attacks before, I realised I was probably taking a heart attack. And it just bowled me over, and I found myself over the cliff edge.
The cliffs at Old Hartley are a sheer drop of 60 feet. There was no fence, nothing to save Ron.
The coastline here is fairly dangerous. The cliff is unstable. Anyone getting too close to the cliff edge is taking a chance that the edge will crumble. Clearly, falling from that height, anybody surviving would have to count themselves fairly lucky.
Ron was one of the lucky ones. Though he bounced on the rocks several times and suffered appalling injuries, he was still alive, but only just.
I was in the sea, and I couldn't move. Nothing would move. So I must have lost consciousness again. And when I came to, I was further out to sea. And I thought I was probably going to die. And I called out my wife's name and my children's name, and theirs. And just more or less resigned myself to wait. Suddenly I felt warm and at peace. Then it just seemed to happen. I found myself in this tunnel with a very bright light at the end of it, and I was walking towards it. At the end of the tunnel, when I arrived there was a bridge. At the far end, there was human shapes, shadows, and I said,
I'm coming across.
The arms were beckoning me, and a voice in my head said, you can't cross the bridge. It's not your time yet. Then suddenly I was rushing backwards, away from the bridge, away from the shadows.
It wasn't until the next morning that a passer-by walking his dog on a beach found Ron in shallow water. He called an ambulance.
Hypothermia is the danger. That time of year when the sea temperature is about 6 or 7 degrees Celsius. Half an hour is a good survival time, and the average person probably wouldn't survive much more than 2.5 hours in the water.
Ron was in the water for 14 hours, but amazingly, when the ambulance crew got to him, there was a glimmer of life.
Breathing. Got a weak pulse. Scuba knife, okay?
When he arrived at the hospital, Ron was clearly in a critical condition, made even more serious by his medical history.
He had a heart attack in the past, and he was in extremely poor state. He had extensive injuries, practically in the whole body. His chance of survival was pretty poor, and similarly the chances for leading a normal life was extremely poor as well.
But had Ron Bell really been at death's door? Did he literally come back to life? And if he did, what did he go through? Dr. Peter Fenwick of the Institute of Psychiatry studies altered states of consciousness in the brain. Ron Bell's case is one of 400 near-death experiences, or NDEs, which he's collected.
Do people make up stories about NDEs? No, I don't think they do. My reason for saying this is that there is a very clear set of features. If you haven't had the experience, it's very difficult to get it right.
Dr. Fenwick argues that because the accounts of Ron Bell and others are so similar, they must be real. But Dr. Susan Blackmore of the West of England University disagrees. She's been investigating near-death experiences for 20 years after having one herself.
I'm convinced that it isn't because we all go to another world, but it's because of what's happening in the brain. Because near death or under stress, there's kind of random firing of all the cells going on in the brain. It could be lack of oxygen, which disturbs the balance of firing, or it could be the brain's own morphine-like chemicals that is experienced as lights, tunnels, hallucinations, and feelings of presence. So I now believe not that the experiences are all the same because we all have a soul or spirit that goes to heaven, but they're all the same because we all have similar brains.
So, the imagination of a dying brain, or as Dr. Fenwick believes, the mind leaving the body to go elsewhere.
It's that the brain isn't functioning. It's not there. It's destroyed. It's abnormal. But yet it can produce these very clear experiences.
I thought I died. I honestly thought I died.
Thank God you're back.
Ron's nurse hadn't expected him to recover. When he did, she remembers clearly what he described to her.
I was very pleased and surprised that he'd recovered. He told me of a dream that he'd had about the tunnel and the shapes and the light, and he was going towards it. It was very convincing, and other patients have told me of the same dream and experience they've had when they've been in that state.
As Ron Bell was to discover, there's something else which those who claim near-death experiences usually find.
Most people lose their fear of death. A lot of people feel that they have a mission that they have to go through. There's something for them to do in this life. And many people are more social. That is, they think more about their friends.
My father was probably quite a selfish person, rather inconsiderate. He never had a great deal of time for us when we were children. He was around, but never for us. Since the accident, I think he's definitely become more responsible towards his family.
The experience also brought about a reconciliation with his wife. They decided to give their marriage another try. Ron's son Robert got married too. After the ceremony, the couple visited him in hospital.
I think he's got more of a sanctity for life. He's got more of a, what would you say, a zest for life, really. He's a lot more of a caring person than he was.
I realised that I'd been given another chance. But if I was to die tomorrow, I would not be afraid. I'm not afraid of death. This is where we'll all go, eventually. I know because I've been there.
Near-death experiences are being taken so seriously that tests are now being carried out in the cardiac units of hospitals around southern England. Objects are being hidden high out of patients' view, and if those who've been near death can later describe the objects, it follows they must have left their bodies. It lasted for decades. It became a national legend, and investigating it was the case of a lifetime for Harry Price, Ghostbuster Supreme. Borley Rectory, in the tiny East Anglian hamlet whose name it bears, was once known as the most haunted house in England. Many people, 5 successive rectors, their wives and families, neighbours and visitors, all apparently saw things there. And the legend lives on.
I've been involved with Borley for over 40 years, 27 years as editor of the local paper. And in every year of those 40 years, something has been reported as happening at Borley. There's nothing there, there's no shop, there's no pub. In fact, the last place that you'd expect to see a stream of visitors.
So how and why has the quiet of the English countryside been so disrupted? Ever since Borley Rectory was built in 1863, reports have abounded of strange whisperings, a ghostly presence, and mysterious so-called accidents. It all began with the daughters of the first vicar, and a truly haunting vision. At the end of the garden, they saw a figure, its head bowed as if in prayer. One of the sisters stepped forward, but as she did, it seemed to vanish into thin air. Peter Underwood, who's been investigating Borley for 40 years, recalls meeting the sisters.
They were
much travelled and intelligent and educated people. They weren't fools, and they certainly wouldn't lower themselves to make stories up to impress other people.
The legend established, claims continued of strange happenings at Borley Rectory. 2 decades later, it was the turn of the Reverend Eric Smith and his wife. They described more voices, footsteps, and servant bells ringing of their own accord. Then, while tidying a cupboard, Mrs. Smith made a gruesome discovery. Wrapped in brown paper, a skull. Beginning to doubt their sanity, the Smiths asked a national newspaper to investigate.
This story could run and run. It seems everyone round here has seen or heard of something. Harry Price? You mean the psychic expert?
The newspaper called in the ghost-busting services of Harry Price.
Reverend Smith and Mrs. Smith.
Oh.
Harry was a former engineer whose marriage to a rich wife meant he could spend his time and her money delving into the paranormal. Mostly he set out to expose psychic frauds. But were the events the Smiths described a fraud?
And you see, you cut the wires and the bells still ring.
Yes, we just...
If he had any doubts about Borley, Harry Price soon experienced strange events at first hand.
Did you see that?
It came from upstairs, but there's no one there.
Harry and the reporter had a narrow escape from a flying candlestick. But there was something of the showman in Harry Price too. He left his paranormal collection to London University. Alan Wesencraft, who looks after it, met the man himself.
I think Harry Price's enthusiasm did lead him into making exaggerated claims. He's had a fertile imagination, and this would take charge, I suppose.
Harry Price told his story to the world, but the Smiths had had enough. They moved out. Several vicars turned down the job before a new one could be found. The Reverend Lionel Algernon Foyster was old enough to be the father of his wife, Marianne.
Lovely day, and the lavender looks beautiful.
Yes, it is a nice day, isn't it? Quite quiet round here after London, though, don't you find?
Life in this backwater was hardly her style, but the paranormal events were.
The poor girl really craved something a little bit more exciting, and she found the excitement, I think, by playing up the idea of the haunts.
Lionel, look at this.
What is it, dear?
Pebbles under my pillow. How on earth did they get there? You must write this up in your diary.
Suspicions that the old vicar was fooled by his wife might have been justified.
First my collar, which I'd taken off for comfort, is thrown at me. Then a stick, and a piece of coal thrown across the room.
But what about the testimony of independent witnesses? A local headmaster and magistrate, Guy Stange, wrote about taking tea with the Foysters.
The other day, the servants' bells started to ring all on their own.
What was that?
Jumping up, I hurried to the door and found the floor outside littered with broken crockery.
It's starting to happen all over again.
Mary! Yes, well, you see, you can never tell what's going to happen in this house. Let's finish our tea while our cups are still intact.
Still not fully convinced, the magistrate returned to his seat. No sooner had he done so,
an appalling series of crashes took us back to the doorway.
And this time, Guy Stange couldn't believe his eyes.
Bottles were being hurled about in all directions in the hall, though nobody could be seen throwing them.
Good God.
When the Foysters left, Harry Price's big moment arrived. He took a year's lease on the rectory and moved in. He placed an advertisement in the Times, inviting people of leisure and intellect to assist in his investigation. Charles Wintour, later a distinguished newspaper editor, was one of those who took up the invitation.
I went to Borley Rectory with an entirely open mind. I was just curious what was happening there. I was convinced that Harry Price was egging it up a bit. There was something occurring, but he was making it more so.
Far better prospect. Let's have a look in here. Yes, this looks interesting. I think you can seal this one up, you know what.
In order to make certain that nobody was interfering with the house, we would place cotton thread across the doors and across the passages so that nobody could sneak up.
When they returned, they found the seals intact. But on inspecting the rooms, Charles Winter and his friend found marks had appeared on the walls, scratches and indecipherable messages.
On one occasion, I thought one of the pencil marks was actually moving as I saw it. It seems mad, but I think that's what I saw at the time.
Harry Price reaped the rewards of his research. His findings were published in best-selling books. Borley Rectory became famous as the most haunted house in England, until one night there was a fire. The rectory was reduced to a ruin. Arson was suspected but could never be proved. With the rectory gone, the haunting was thought to be over. In any case, for many, Harry Price's exaggerations and Marianne Foyster's confessions, made to investigators like Peter Underwood, had discredited the story. But was there still more to it?
There were things going on at Borley long before Marianne went there. There were things going on at Borley long before Harry Price went there. And there were things happening at Borley long after Marianne left and long after Harry Price was dead.
The new vicar buried bones found during the rectory demolition and began to claim new happenings across the road at Borley Church itself.
He was the one more than anyone else who moved the ghost from one side of the road to the other. He was the man who said, you know, that strange things are happening in my church. I've seen things in my church. I've heard things in my church. And because he was the vicar or the rector, people believed him.
It's in the medieval church that Ron Russell and other psychic investigators have continued Harry Price's work. One night, he and a small team set up tape recorders there.
To our surprise, we received a series of strange, unaccountable noises on the tapes. I've no doubt in my own mind that these sounds were paranormal.
And the stories of unexplained incidents continue.
Just heard what sounded like an organ playing from inside the church. But as we went in the church, it suddenly stopped. To our utter amazement, there was not a soul in the church. The organ console was closed and padlocked.
Once we were inside the church, we carried on looking round when I was aware of the sound of pebbles falling down on the ground. I looked, but I couldn't actually see any pebbles.
Like all the other claims surrounding Borley over the years, there is an explanation, but an incomplete one.
Some local boys confessed that they'd been hiding in the church. One had pumped the organ up and the other had played a few bars, and they then died behind the pews. Since then, in recent times, the church has been locked, and still people are saying they're hearing the organ. What do you make of that? I don't know.
Harry Price died 9 years after Borley Rectory was destroyed. Almost immediately, books were published tearing his work to shreds. But expert opinion is divided. Though they agree his claims were exaggerated, many still back him. And to this day, a special library is dedicated to him at London University. And of course, Harry, wherever he is now, can't be accused of interfering in events since his death. At least not if he's sitting in one of these. Good night.
Of all the people who claim to have witnessed unexplained phenomena, very few can offer what can be regarded as proof. Their stories can be easily dismissed, and often are, but do they deserve more? All we can do is look them in the eye and decide for ourselves whether they're genuine, and ask ourselves why anyone should make up such a story, especially when they risk ridicule. The key witnesses in our first story tonight are people you'd normally trust. Some indeed have frequently given evidence in courts of law. Here's the story, believe what you will. Ever since building work began, a new section of road across the top of the Peak District has attracted reports of strange happenings. The first was from 2 security guards, and this is what they saw one night.
Roses. A group of children running in a circle in a field at the side of a construction site. The time was round about midnight, and you just wouldn't see children playing there at that time of night when it was so far away from any houses. And the children disappeared. They were security men who'd been in the industry a long time. They knew the job. They had worked nights for a number of years, and not the type of people that you'd expect to be scared.
The A616 used to pass straight through this old steel town, but then the road planners got to work on Stocksbridge. They built a sweeping new bypass. While it may have made the town quieter, some believe the bypass disturbed something which would have been best left alone. Certainly the 2 security guards who were watching over the equipment being used to build it would agree. They were still puzzling over the sight of the children, but that was just the beginning.
The next incident was later on that night.
Here, Stan, stop the car. Look, there's someone up there. Don't be daft. It can't be. Yes, there is. Look! You drive around, shine your lights on bridge. I'll wait down here. Right.
They immediately started the vehicle up, shone the headlights towards the hooded figure, and the headlights actually shone through the figure.
Oh, God! It's disappeared into thin air! Let's get out of here!
The men, in a state of shock, called their boss out. He was alarmed at the state they were in.
Dan, Jeff. They were physically shaking. Their complexion was very white and pallid. One of the guards was actually crying.
Go on, try me. Well, it's difficult to describe it. Yeah. It looked like a monk. I mean, what were he doing there? I don't know, it were evil. Yeah. How can it just disappear?
First thing the next morning, the men went to the local police. The officer on duty knew them.
It was obvious that they'd seen or heard something. They were both spooked. And basically, I said to them it was not really a police matter and there was nothing I could do about it. And perhaps jokingly, I told them that really they needed the church more than they needed the police.
But they took him seriously. They went to Stocksbridge Church and refused to leave.
About an hour or so later, I received a phone call from my boss, and I was told to go up to the church and sort this matter out, firstly to get them out of the church, and then see if I could find out anything that they'd actually seen, heard, or whatever.
The security guards never, it seems, got over what happened to them.
One of them left after 3 days, and the other one stayed with us roughly 2 to 3 months, and neither of the 2 guards would set foot on that site again, even in the daylight.
While the bypass was being built, runner Graham Brooke was training for a marathon. One day he was out jogging with his son Nigel.
I saw a chap walking with his back to the traffic. He was walking in the middle of the road.
I looked at it and you could see it had no features to it except for a nose and eye sockets.
I could smell like this fusty, rottenish smell.
Not a human type smell.
And then I could see that he wasn't walking on the road,
It was like walking in the road, and from below the knee down, you know, you couldn't see anything.
Each time things are apparently seen, the descriptions vary, but the reputation of the bypass deepens.
We were coming home from Judy's parents over the bridge that goes over the bypass.
Dave, look. I could see out of the corner of my eye like a grey apparition. There was actually no facial expressions.
It was hovering. Arms and legs were flaying all over the place.
Strange. It looks almost like a man running. But he's not running on the ground.
It would run up the embankment.
He actually rose from the side into the road and he disappeared into the car. Oh my God!
I can think of no other explanation for what we saw. In my mind, I think in both of our minds, what we saw had to have been a ghost.
So if something does keep appearing on the bypass, what is it? Lucinda June is a psychic. She says she knows.
I was driving along the Stocksbridge bypass and the car started to become very, very cold. With this came a smell of musty books. Then all of a sudden a darkness appeared to the left-hand side of me and I felt very, very frightened. And I did pick up the spirit of a monk that had been there 500 years previous.
But why should a long-dead monk be on what is now the Stocksbridge bypass? It's been discovered there were once monastery farms in the area.
The rumour or the story is that one of these monks became disillusioned with the rather harsh autocratic way of life. He came here to Underbank Hall, worked the rest of his natural life here as groundsman or whatever, and subsequently when he died he was buried in unhallowed ground.
Some believe the bypass may have been built over the supposed monk's grave, and they also have theories to explain the children seen by the security guards.
Children were used in the valley's coal mines in the late 18th and mid-19th century. The rumour suggests that there's been some sort of a mining catastrophe.
So, a phantom monk, ghostly children. After dealing with the security men in the church, P.C. Ellis and his colleague John Beat were sent to investigate.
Let's switch the radios off.
Right.
We sat in the panda car with the lights off, the engine off. Seems all right.
We sat looking at the bridge, and after a while I was convinced I could see something moving about on the bridge. Not wanting to spook myself or John, I kind of looked at John.
Hang on. What's that up there? Go and see what it is, Dick.
I actually climbed up the ladder onto the bridge, and